name is Josh Flowers. I run a YouTube channel called Aviation101. I'm a pilot flight instructor out of Central Texas.
How'd you get started doing this?
Kind of by accident on YouTube. I got started really by accident. I produced a video that I thought nothing about. It was a video of my discovery flight. And I guess if I back up a number of years, my dad is the one that got me into flying. When I was 3, they sold their 172. My parents had a Cessna 172 for 17 years, all through the 80s and 90s. And then once they sold the airplane, I had very vague memories of flying, just little snippets here and there that I could remember. And then from what we had on camera, my dad's always been into filming everything for home movies and stuff like that.
Is that his career?
So his primary career is working for the state of Texas, Department of Agriculture. But my parents had a side business where they filmed live events, mainly weddings is what they were doing. And back in the 80s and 90s when they had the plane, they would film some of their trips and such with the plane on VHS cameras. And we kept archives of all that stuff, and my dad was very good about that. So my dad got me into flying, and both of my parents got me into the filmmaking side of it. Growing up, I was around them filming weddings, and I would go to a lot of the rehearsals where they were kind of scouting out shots and stuff like that. And every now and then I'd go with them to help. And of course I was with them through the whole post-production side of things, the editing, and I saw how all that worked. I just got into it. And kind of growing up, I don't remember a time that I didn't have a camera somewhere nearby that I was messing with and getting shots with and stuff.
Was it your idea to film your discovery flight?
I think it was kind of a mutual decision to film the discovery flight initially between my dad and I. If I didn't mention filming it, he would have just filmed it. So it was going to happen either way.
Were you behind the camera and behind the yoke at the same time, or
No.
you?
So my dad actually went with me. I had technically 2 discovery flights because I went up at a flight school at one point, and very shortly thereafter that flight school closed at Austin. And then we heard about a different flight school. So that first discovery flight was in an Archer, Piper Archer. My dad rode in the back for it. It was in Texas in December, and it was in the 80s, and we had air conditioning. So that I specifically remember that being a great part. He rode in the back of the plane. We filmed that, and then about 6 months later, that flight school went under. I think they went bankrupt and such, and we went to a different flight school on the other side of the airport that had tons of 172s and a couple 152s, and that seemed like a better option to learn to fly at. So my dad sat in the back seat for both of those. And
did you fall in love with flying, or do you think it was a part in your blood and it just was a natural thing?
I think it was just a natural thing because of it being there when I was born. I mean, my parents had the plane, and it was just, I don't know, it was always this immersive thought of flying, and I have this very vivid memory, and it was always kind of, it was always brought back up every time I would look at our old home video footage on these VHS tapes. It was a handheld camera that sits on your shoulder, one of these big VHS camcorders, and they would record in the plane. And there was one specific shot of my dad. It was dusk, and he wasn't using any headsets or anything. This was in 1989 or something like that. And I remember just hearing him picking up a clearance, hearing the controller over the loudspeaker, and it's kind of crackly and crappy quality, and I don't know why, but that's just what I always came back to. Until to this day, I can sit in a brand new airplane, doesn't matter what it is. When I hear an air traffic controller over one of those 4-inch cone speakers in the cockpit, it just reminds me of that excitement of just wanting to learn about it and get into this as a kid.
Now, your dad was a pilot. Was your mom also a pilot?
She's not, but my mom has been an avid supporter of both of us, and she's flown with him all over the place. For her work, they used to fly to conventions and stuff like that using the plane, and back then with 2 kids, and they would have the strollers in the back of the Skyhawk and everything, and they flew all over the place.
So tell me what Aviation 101 is. If you have to give me your mission statement or just like your thought process of what you feel like it is.
So Aviation 101 is really, it's kind of changed meanings for me over the years. At first, it was my creative outlet to post videos and give me an excuse to use a camera and produce something, because that's as deep of a passion as mine, as deep of a passion of mine as flying, every bit. So it was an excuse for me to have my foot in video production, and I learned about it, and I learned every step of the way. I never went to school for it or anything. As Aviation 101 kind of progressed, I learned how to fly, got my private, got my instrument, and then through my commercial. And up until that point, it was just kind of about just sharing my experiences. There was not a clearly defined purpose behind what I was posting. Of course, back then, I saw a purpose of, I'm sharing my flights. That's what I'm doing. But as time went on, I can look back on that and say my purpose is much more clear to me now. And of course, hindsight's 20/20. But as time has progressed, I got my CFI, became a flight instructor, and that was really a pivotal point. I started to learn about the law of primacy, fundamentals of instructing, setting a good example, and what it means to be a role model in aviation. And I got my flight instructor because I did feel like I would like teaching. I don't have an intention to go to the airlines, at least not right now. It's not in the books for me. And getting the flight instructor certificate was the next logical step. And once I got my flight instructor, I learned about this whole other side, or this whole new perspective to look at general aviation from, and that was setting a good example. And I started to look at that in conjunction with social media, and looking at what kind of stuff gets posted out there on social media, and even some of the stuff that I've posted over the years, that looking back on it, I'm like, wow, I hope not too many student pilots watched that, because either I really did not explain that well, or I totally made it look illegal, or I made it look like that was an irresponsible decision. And in some cases it was, and there was no avoiding that. So what it really turned into for me, and what it is to me today, is it's a way for me it's a creative outlet for me in terms of filmmaking. That's a bonus, in my opinion. The main mission of Aviation 101, and I'd like to keep it this way, is to show off the beauty of general aviation while showing that you can have an absolute blast and a fun time with it and go to these gorgeous, beautiful places, see friends and family across the country, even in a Skyhawk. You don't need an extraordinary airplane for it, while also showing the safety side of it and the responsible side of it. And look, you can be a safe pilot that is a stickler for the rules and make sure you're doing everything by the book, because those rules and recommendations are written in blood. They're there for a reason. But you don't have to get rid of the fun part.
So you've been doing this for about 10 years. How many videos do you think you've produced in that 10-year period?
I haven't looked at the number, but on the creator dashboard on YouTube or something like that, it shows I've probably put out somewhere close to 500, but I'd have to go look. I'm not entirely sure.
And do you own your own plane?
So the plane is owned technically by my dad at this point. We treat it like a partnership. And we've bought this thing as a way for me to build ours, and he stopped flying when they sold their Skyhawk in, I think it was 1999. So when they sold that 172, he pretty much stopped flying. Life happened, work was getting busy, and they were building a new house. It was kind of something that he was ready to put aside for now. So when they sold the airplane, he wasn't flying anymore. And when I got my private, he got inspired to get back into it and go get a flight review done and start flying again. And at that point we said, well, now we're father and son, 2 pilots, and we don't have an airplane. So we both started kind of looking and keeping an eye out there, and he really wanted a 172 because that's what he's so familiar with. And it's just nostalgic for him. And for me too, that's what I got inspired with in all the home movies and stuff. So we found that airplane in 2013. Wasn't listed anywhere. I took a friend to lunch at a nearby airport, rented a 152 and landed, parked on the ramp, and there was a kind of a beat down looking Skyhawk with a for sale sign in the windshield. I looked at it and looked at the specs and the time and everything, and the guy had his phone number. I just took a picture of it and said, yeah, we'll look at it later. And we talked about it, and there were a couple of other options. Excuse me. There were a couple of other options that we were already looking at, like Cherokee that looked like a good deal at another airport and stuff like that. But we just kind of kept coming back to the Skyhawk because it was, at the time, it was a good deal, and it was a project. It was going to be a father-son project, and we said, well, there's so much we can do with this. It's going to need new paint. It's going to need a new engine, all this kind of stuff. So we just got a hold of that airplane, and we just started flying. And now, we've owned that airplane for 9 years now. I turned around, got my CFII in that airplane, and I was able to take my dad through his instrument rating.
How was that?
As a flight instructor. Great. An amazing learning experience. For him taking an FAA check ride for the first time in 25 years, something like that. It's probably closer to 35 years, something like that. So for him taking an FAA check ride for the first time in a long time, that was one thing that was a kind of a learning curve for him. And also for me as an instructor, he was my first sign-off. And I made sure to kind of hold out for that because I wanted him. And we trained on and off. He works full-time, I work full-time. And it was tricky getting our schedules to align. But once we did, we finished it up, and it was a very cool full circle experience.
And is Aviation 101 your full-time job? And when you describe to somebody what your job entails, what would you say?
So my job really entails, if I'm going to simplify it as best as I can, showing off all sorts of different facets of general aviation travel while also making it educational. Showing off the beauty of it while showing off the educational side as well. And that's kind of how I get to continuously exercise my flight instructor certificate, aside from obviously flying with students here and there.
Well, you said something earlier about the fact that it all looks glamorous from this side, but then you go back. Tell me what you meant by that.
So if you're doing stuff on social media, which I would consider is mostly my full-time job, I do a lot of film. I do some film work here and there, kind of on a contract basis that's outside of social media. It's separate. But when you're doing stuff for social media, which is the bulk of what I do for a living, it's my job to make it look fun and glamorous. And let's be honest, flying is. It is. It's in a lot of ways, it's hard to make it look not. But we travel around. Like, for example, right now we're on this. Now we're going on a month and a half that we've been gone traveling. And we started with Oshkosh, and we went to Canada, up to New York, and then now we're here. We're going to the Caribbean on the way, down the East Coast. We're spending this much time, probably at the end of it, about 2 months of filming for this series, for example. That's going to be a solid year of work, post-production. The glamorous flying part and going to the cool destinations is 10% of it. The other 90% is going to be me sitting behind a computer with my headphones on, trying to stay alive with coffee, and just trying to tell the story, try to do this story of each flight, do it justice, for one, and two, deliver the message that I think is the most appropriate.
So why do you think you're popular?
It's a good question. Am I popular? Do we consider it
Do you have
that?
a lot of followers?
Over the years, it's come up to about 250,000 subscribers on YouTube. And in aviation, I think that's pretty middle of the road. And it's a very niche market. Why would the channel have become as popular as it has? It's a really tough question. I don't know.
It's your charming, boyish good looks.
I don't know about that. If there was one thing that I had to force myself to attribute it to, I would say that it's the educational twist, the educational nature that I put behind the videos, because I do think a lot of my followers, or a lot of my audience on YouTube, they are wanting to get into flying, or they're in the middle of their training and they're just looking for like that one example of how to pick up flight following, and they just want to hear me do it in a regular instance. Or some of them are people who have had their CFI for a long time, and they're looking for some inspiration to just get their multi so they can get that faster airplane and start doing some more traveling, something like that. So I think it's the educational aspect, and I think in recent years, at least, it's the additional effort that I've put into it on the cinematic side, and I've really started showing off the beauty as best as I can, while keeping it about flying, but show off the beauty of the places that we're going.
Who do you follow?
In aviation, honestly, I don't follow too many. Like, I don't watch really any other aviation YouTube videos unless they're my friend. You know, I have friends kind of scattered all over the place that I do keep up with them on YouTube, but I find my inspiration a lot of times. I'll even go back, and if I'm feeling kind of in a creative rut, I will go back and watch one of my videos from a year and a half ago and remind myself what I was producing when I was feeling really inspired about that. And then that's kind of where I get my inspiration to go forward with that. Somebody that I do follow pretty regularly is he actually is a pilot. I found out after following him for a couple of years. I didn't even know it. But he makes overlanding videos in Australia. I'm very into camping, outdoorsy type stuff. And I like to think our styles are very similar. He is very into the storytelling side, makes beautiful films, but he also just teaches he's an expert at what he does. And he just sits there and just casually talks like you're sitting around a campfire having a beer with him. And he talks about what he likes to do in certain situations and equipment he likes to carry and such. And I like to kind of emulate that a little bit. At least when I'm in the plane, I talk as though a student pilot's sitting next to me. Or when I'm sitting here, holding the camera out front, talking to the camera, I talk as though there is a student pilot standing right in front of me, and I'm explaining to them what I'm about to do, why I'm about to do that, and why I think that's the best way that we should do it on this flight, for example.